Picture this for a second. $24 billion, just locked away in a bank account. Now, imagine another country stepping in, trying to take total control of that massive sum to pay for war damages. Honestly, it sounds exactly like the plot of some intense geopolitical thriller, doesn't it? But there's no script here. This is exactly what's unfolding right now in a rapidly escalating, high-stakes dispute between the United States and Iran. Welcome to this explainer. Today, I'm going to be putting on my impartial international legal mediator hat. We are absolutely not here to pick sides. What we're going to do is look at the hard facts, lay out the legal arguments from both camps, and dissect this massive geopolitical deadlock over what is, frankly, a staggering amount of money. We'll explore who really owns these funds, why they got locked away in the first place, and how this localized legal battle over a bank account could suddenly send shockwaves right through the global economy. Okay, let's dive into this mediation docket for today. We'll start with the asset freeze, followed by the timeline of sanctions. Then we'll hit the legal clash, alliances instability, the Hormuz threat, and finally wrap up with legal compromise. Number 1 on our docket, the $24 billion asset freeze. So let's get our baseline facts straight before we analyze the arguments. What exactly are frozen assets? The definition is pretty straightforward, but the real-world implications are huge. We're talking about money and property that officially belong to a country, but they literally cannot be accessed, moved, or spent. Why? Usually it's due to heavy international sanctions, strict court orders, or rigid government restrictions. So the money exists on a ledger, sure, but that vault door is firmly slammed shut. Right now, Iran has billions of dollars sitting in this exact state in banks all over the world, completely untouchable for Tehran. Moving to Section 2, the timeline of sanctions. This freeze didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden flip of a switch. It is actually the result of decades of compounding international policy. We start way back, decades ago, with the initial sanctions. Then, years later, those were heavily layered with new sanctions specifically targeting Iran's nuclear program. Fast forward to recent years, and we see even more restrictions piled on due to regional conflicts. And today, well, all of this is tangled up in the broader, escalating tensions between the US and Iran. So layer by layer, year after year, this timeline created a colossal accumulation of locked wealth. We're talking about estimates of frozen Iranian assets worldwide well into the tens of billions. Which brings us to Section 3, the legal ownership clash. Putting our mediator hat firmly back on, let's look at the fundamental clash in ownership rights here. The reported U.S. position currently being weighed in Washington is to redirect these frozen funds to pay for the reconstruction of Gulf allies who've suffered damages. Now, against that, we have Iran's fierce, unequivocal rejection of the idea. Tehran argues that these assets are legally theirs, period. They insist this money isn't just war spoils waiting to be handed out, and that any seizure without their consent would be a direct, blatant violation of international law. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how perfectly it maps out this legal stalemate. The U.S. and Gulf states want to redirect the funds. Their legal justification? They argue Iran allegedly caused damage through recent missile and drone attacks, Gulf allies suffered the losses, and therefore Iranian assets should foot the bill for reconstruction. On the flip side, Iran's primary demand is the absolute return of the funds. Their justification is purely rooted in sovereignty. They argue the money legally belongs to them, that Gulf states have absolutely no right to demand compensation from these specific accounts, and that the funds need to be released back as part of the ongoing peace negotiations. Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, alliances and diplomatic stability. Right now, Treasury officials are actively assessing the reconstruction costs for key Gulf allies, specifically Kuwait and Bahrain, following those recent missile and drone attacks linked to the conflict. Now, redistributing these funds might seem like a neat solution for the U.S., but Iran is explicitly warning that a seizure like this could trigger severe retaliation. And beyond that, Iranian officials and advisors have made it clear that releasing these assets is the ultimate litmus test. It's the major test to see if Washington is genuinely serious about hammering out a broader peace agreement. We are walking an incredibly thin diplomatic tightrope here, folks. Pivoting to Section 5, the Strait of Hormuz threat. As a mediator, I has to pose this question to all of you. Why does this localized legal fight over one specific pool of money actually matter to the entire world? Well, if you're an energy investor or really anyone focused on global logistics, the answer to this is deeply, deeply concerning. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why. Recent negotiations have tightly linked these frozen assets with sanctions relief and maritime security.
If step 1 happens, meaning negotiations over these funds fail, we instantly move to step 2. Tensions escalate at the Strait of Hormuz. For those who don't know, that's a highly strategic waterway where a massive share of the world's oil shipments travel every single day. That immediately leads to step 3, the disruption of global oil shipments, and finally, step 4, immediate, severe energy market volatility. For energy investors, this is literally the nightmare scenario. A failure to resolve a $24 billion bank dispute could choke off the global oil supply.
Finally, entering the last phase of our mediation, Section 6, seeking a legal compromise. So where does this leave us? Well, negotiators are staring down a harsh, incredibly strict binary choice. On one hand, they can return the money to Iran, which Iranian officials suggest is absolutely necessary to keep broader peace talks alive and maintain any semblance of maritime security. Or, on the other hand, they can redirect it to compensate Gulf allies like Kuwait and Bahrain. That satisfies the immediate demand for reconstruction, sure, but it risks direct retaliation and the total collapse of those negotiations. Make no mistake, this $24 billion is the absolute fulcrum of international leverage right now. Which brings us to a powerful final thought. As the source material so perfectly puts it, the fight isn't really about $24 billion. It's about power, leverage, and who gets to write the rules after a conflict. And honestly, that hits the nail on the head. That is the true heart of this explainer. The money? It's just the playing field. The game being played here will define international law, global energy stability, and Middle Eastern diplomacy for years, maybe decades to come. So I'll leave you with this. When the dust finally settles, who do you think will ultimately get to write those rules? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this incredible geopolitical puzzle.